I spent this past summer as an intern chaplain at a hospital in downtown Boston. So for 11 weeks, I spent my days knocking on hospital room doors, initiating conversations with patients and their families. On the patient medical charts for the hospital, there are 51 things listed that chaplains can do. So maybe it's not a surprise that people have a lot of different ideas about what it is a chaplain does, or what it is we're supposed to be, or what the heck it even means. I was one of those people with a lot of different ideas, no less so now. One thing I learned was that the moment I stepped in the door, everyone had a story about me. And that story, at least early on, defined our interactions. Some people were so grateful to see me. Some were disappointed. Some were nervous. Some relieved. It was a vivid illustration that the way people interacted with me had nothing at all to do with me and everything that had to do with the story they have about me. And it made me start to wonder how much of the way I interact with others has to do with the stories I have about them rather than who they are. I had wondered about these first impressions before I even started this internship. Before I started working at the hospital, I had never done a job anything like this. It's a stretch to say I'd even ever had really a job at all. I had never not worked from home. I had never worked 40 hours. I had never worked for a company with more than a couple of employees. Brigham Hospital has more than a couple of employees. Now, while some other novice chaplains are reasonably worried about what it will be like to sit with people on the worst day of their lives, or how to comfort someone in the depths of grief and loss, my own nervousness took the form of obsessively worrying about fashion. Not a thing I had really ever worried about before. I fussed and I fretted about clothing. I worried and I wondered about what to wear. What would be totally neutral yet professional? What could I possibly wear that would be appropriate if I suddenly found myself at a funeral, but also wouldn't like the funeral had arrived every time I entered the room? At one point, I was relieved to be in a conversation with two professional chaplains. I was sitting with them, they were side by side, and I asked them this question. One of them said, "Go with color. Be yourself. Be unique. Bring joy." The other said, "No. Suit and tie, blend in, don't stand out. Black is safe, and it's a safe color, and you want to go with safe." Needless to say, this did not help. I eventually had to resign myself to the idea that there was no magical outfit that would disarm someone of all of their preconceived stories about me. And it would be easy to say that the assumptions were all one-sided, but I was not immune to this either. Before knocking on a patient's door, I could read their medical chart, but that rarely told me what to truly expect. I learned that there's many more than one kind of Catholic. There is more than one kind of cancer. There is more than one way to make meaning of suffering. Over and over again, as I would begin to create a picture of what to expect, the patient or family member I would meet on the other side of the door would serve as a reminder that my imagined stories meant nothing. Now, if there was ever a time to assume a conversation would go a certain kind of way, surely it would be with someone I had already met. But even that wasn't necessarily the case. Toward the end of my time at the hospital, I had a visit with someone that was particularly difficult. The patient was in her last days, dying of cancer, and her spouse, who I'll call Jim, was sitting by her bed. Jim had ideas about God that I didn't agree with, which happened all the time, but in this particular case, I thought the stories he had were really keeping him from being present with his partner in this precious time. I was frustrated with him, and I was frustrated with myself for not finding better ways to engage in the conversation. So the next morning, I knocked on the door of my supervisor. I shared my discomfort with her. I shared all the things I wished Jim had done differently. And I shared the things I wished I had done differently. She suggested that I go visit again, but she cautioned me. Don't try to redo yesterday's conversation. Go back there today and do today's conversation. If his spouse's illness is continuing to progress, she said, she might be in a very different place today, and he might also be in a different place today. So go back, but go with curiosity for today, not expectations from yesterday. Friends, if you have ever tried to repeat an old script even when the situation was new, you know the wisdom as well as the challenge of this advice. That next day, things were different. At first, Jim seemed to want to have the exact same conversation we'd had the day before, but I tried to stay curious, and after a while, things began to shift. We spoke more about what he wanted, how he wanted to be present with his partner in these last days. He held her hand. He played music for her. He shared tender goodbyes. And things between him and I felt different too. The day was new, and so were we. Showing up with curiosity, leaving your stories about someone at the door, is an idea that some chaplains call the intimate stranger. It means that the less you assume about a person, the more you can be present with who they really are in front of you. And so I invite you all, dear ones, into this practice of holy curiosity for the stranger that allows us to meet the real person where they are really at. Now, if you didn't spend your summer walking up to perfect strangers and asking them about their deepest hopes and fears, that might have only been true for some of you this summer, maybe this all seems like a lesson for an irrelevant few. But being an intimate stranger is, I think, easiest when it's an actual stranger. In my experience, at least, the more you think you know a person, the harder it gets. The week after this internship ended, in fact, I was spending some time with family, and I remember turning to my partner and saying, How is it that I spent all summer learning to stay open and curious and be a non-anxious presence? But as soon as I try and have a conversation with my mother about where to go to dinner, I lose my GD mind. Honey, she said, it's because it's your mother. I've noticed similarly that when I get most frustrated with my housemates, it's almost inevitably because I am using uncurious language we call absolutist. I start to have these imaginary conversations with them that begin with words like, you always, or why don't you ever? Don't tell my housemates I said that. These words are the sound of unholy anti-curiosity. These aren't words that describe a person. They're words that describe a story I tell myself about a person. And so, I learned how to bring that holy curiosity into the hospital room. But believe me, friends, when I tell you, I am still learning how to bring it to the people I'm closest with. My second invitation for you is to show up as the intimate stranger for the people you know well. Go back to your spouse, your colleague, or your family, and instead of trying to redo yesterday's conversation, do today's. Before you knock on their door, or pick up the phone, or join the meeting, invite your own holy curiosity. I wonder who this person is today. I wonder what they need today. And my third invitation is that you do this for yourself as well. Perhaps the hardest of all is to bring that curiosity to the person I am very closest to, the person I am stuck with 24/7, the person who I have more stories about than anybody. Just because I was focused all day yesterday and got a whole bunch of things done, that doesn't mean that's the standard I need to hold myself to today. Or just because yesterday was a cluster intercourse of mistakes and miscommunications, I'm keeping it clean here, that doesn't mean I can't be a different person today. The day is new, friends, and so are we. The metta meditation in the Buddhist tradition extends an offering of loving kindness, first to oneself, and then to loved ones, and then to strangers. Today, I offer you these three invitations in reverse. Extend holy curiosity to strangers, and then extend it to loved ones, and finally, if you can, extend it to yourself. Leave behind the stories that no longer serve you. Allow yourself to be an intimate stranger to each new day. Don't redo yesterday, do today.